So it's continuous conscious breathing, no rest between the inhale and the exhale. So it'd be like, generally you want to breathe through your nose, right? Because your nose, you're increasing nitric oxide, you're preparing the breath for the lungs. It's a much healthier way of breathing.
Yeah.
For this type of breath work, I'm having people breathe through the mouth, and the reason is you get more of an emotional and sympathetic type of response. So it's a way of accessing stored emotions and trauma that are oftentimes stored in your hara or your gut. And so you do this continuous breath work, and after you've done the repetition for a little bit, that's when you do your breath holds. And people like Wim Hof, he does his breath holds primarily on expiration. So he'll have you breathe in and then breathe out and hold it for like 1 to 2 minutes. And then what we're doing, what I was taught through Soma, is that there's 2 types of breath holds, one on inspiration and one on expiration. So you start with the expiration first, blow out all the air, and that's when you start a lot of times feeling that tingling, and that's when your mind is going to start to wander, and you're kind of going to get past that default mode network. And then you're perturbing your system in a good way, creating a positive stressor. That's where you get like a short-term hypoxia, and that stimulates all those chemicals, those healthy chemicals like I was talking about, like anandamide and dopamine, so and other neurotransmitters.
Hey friends, welcome back. So today's show with Dr. Geoff Lecovin is brought to you by Myoscience Nutrition. As you can tell, we're talking a lot about shifting your mental state, being more calm, relaxed, being more intentional about your thoughts and your feelings. One nutritional tool that can help you is the MyoRelax and Calm. It features things like L-theanine, GABA, taurine, magnesium, and myo-inositol, all nutrients that are supportive and synergistic with inducing a calm, relaxation type state. There's over 160 some odd reviews on this formulation over at our website, myoscience.com. That's MYOXCIENCE.com. What's unique about this formula is it not only helps with electrolyte balance because it has glycine and potassium, but it also helps induce a calm relaxation state. This is a great tasting powder drink mix that you can use in the evening time instead of using things like alcohol or substances that have downsides and so forth. This has benefits by improving electrolyte balance and helping to support a calm relaxation type state. You can save with the code podcast over at myoscience.com using the code podcast at checkout to save. Now, Geoff Lecovin has been a friend for a very long time, over 10 years. I have seen him shift dramatically in his mindset, in his intentionality, using breathwork and using psilocybin. So today he gets vulnerable. He talks about how microdosing and macrodosing with psilocybin has helped repair troubled relations with people in his life and helped him bring and manifest a lot of intentions and goals and desires that he's had in his life. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. So let's get back to it. Geoff, it's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk a lot about mindset, spirituality, and psychedelics. I think this is a really hot topic, and the medical understanding of how psychedelics can help people with PTSD and anxiety and depression is just so fascinating. You turned me on to all sorts of different podcasts and literature supporting this, which I think is just so fascinating. Would love to dive into how you got into using psilocybin and cannabis to support your own health, and how you're using this potentially in your practice, or how did you sort of stumble upon this whole realm?
Sure. Let's go back to in my teens. I'd always been interested in altered states of consciousness, and started reading books by Carlos Castaneda. It was like The Teaching of Don Juan, and then got into other altered states of consciousness books. I think there was one by Andrew Weil, and I was always really interested in these altered states, but kind of timid in terms of how to get there, and wasn't really much into meditating, although I was interested in it. Just didn't develop a practice just because of where I was in my life at that time with school and just focusing on my education. And then fast forward a few years, I'm practicing as a naturopath, chiropractor, acupuncturist for about 30 years, and it took me 30 years pretty much to revisit it again, and started getting more interested again in altered states of consciousness. So if we define altered states of consciousness, we're looking at another state other than your sleeping state. So for example, you have different brain waves, right? You have delta theta, alpha, beta, gamma, and the delta theta are your sleeping states, And then as you get into your waking state, that would be your beta state. So we're looking at other than your beta state. And so when you look at like monks, for example, they're in that gamma state, or people who have ESP, and then people who do like breath work or other types of meditation practices, you're in a combination of those states, like using alpha as the bridge to get into like a deeper state. So I had a friend who was growing some mushrooms, and I was a little timid with the whole mushroom experience, and kind of put it to the side. And then it was my wife's 50th, and I said, let's revisit it. So another friend of mine had been doing some psilocybin journeys, and she gave me a name of a couple in the Seattle area that were leading journeys. So I contacted them, and I said, okay, for my wife's 50th birthday, I'm going to buy us a trip. So that's how it started.
That's awesome. And it seems like there's more emphasis being placed on macro dosage versus microdosing. So, you mentioned that friend. I was growing psilocybin for microdosing, and I never had done a macro dose until, incidentally, 2 months ago, you were like, hey, Mike, come on, let's do it. And I experienced a lot of benefit from that. I think a lot of people are afraid to do a macro dose. So what is there benefits? Because I think a lot of people are microdosing, like in Silicon Valley. There's tech people. There's all these things. They'll take a cap or a stem or whatever. But I think there's a lot of benefit to actually going beyond the microdose and macrodosing with psilocybin.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about dosing. We'll look at psilocybin first. Mm-hmm. If you look at, let's say, a microdose, for example, and some people say a microdose is a subperceptual dose, and really that's not the best explanation. A microdose would be more of a sub-intoxicating dose. So you do feel something, but you're not at the point where you're intoxicated and you can't function. So when you were looking at mushrooms, anywhere up to about 500 milligrams would be considered a microdose. And then 1 gram would be like a museum dose, so you could go to a museum or a party or something like that of that nature, and be more in a social environment. And then once you start getting up to like 3 grams and more, then you start getting into like more of a macro dose. And like a 5 gram would be considered a heroic dose. If you look at like Terence McKenna's and some of his lectures, he talks about that, where you take that dose and go into a dark room and close your eyes and just kind of be with it.
Is that the most you've done? 5 grams?
I've never done 5 grams. I've done up to 4, and I kind of feel like it's been like, so over the last year, I've done about 7 or 8 journeys, most of them with a shaman who that I met, and it's been a phenomenal experience because she's created an experience where you go to her place. She's got a yurt. It's outside in nature, and you have an intention that you set. So I'll give you an example. Like one of the intentions I set was to connect with my dad who had passed away, and during the our trip, some classical music came on, and music's a really important part of the journey. And this woman, she and her partner create a music based on your taste, and my tastes are somewhat psychedelic, so a lot of times they'll be like The Doors, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, that kind of thing. But a classical music song came on, and all of a sudden I felt my dad's presence with me, and it was like I was hearing the music through his ears and feeling the passion that he had for the music, like we were together, giving me an appreciation. It was like magical. And I never really was one who like cared for classical music, but it kind of gave me a reappreciation and a connection with my dad, who's no longer with me in the physical sense.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's all in the dosing, right? So like once you start getting, over that 2 gram dose for psilocybin, you start getting into like that more psychedelic or experience that you can't even really describe unless you've had it. It's like kind of like it's an appreciation. I was talking to my wife not too long ago after I did a journey. It was like, hey, I can really understand how, if you believe in God, that there's a God presence everywhere, because you feel like this connection with the universe that's like ineffable. You can't describe it in words.
It's hard to put language to it.
Oh, it's not. It's like you can't put a language to it. It's like blissful, euphoric connection.
And what would you say, because you're a religious person, right? You're practicing Jew and so forth. Yeah. I think a lot of people are like, hey, look, my religion is enough. I don't need to connect to the universe or to my higher self or whatever. Why would I need, some people might characterize them as drugs or something, psilocybin or cannabis or LSD. Why would I need these things to connect more? What would you say to that argument?
Well, I mean, let's go back to like entheogens and how they were kind of initially used. So there was something called, look at Ayurvedic types of cultures, right? They had something called soma. And when they look at like some of the writings and when they've kind of like done studies on what soma was, they kind of figured it was kind of some kind of brew that could have been a combination of cannabis and psilocybin. And these ancients would take this brew to achieve an altered state and connect with a higher being or higher power or get messages. And at one point that soma became, it was inaccessible. And so they either they couldn't find it or it was taken away for political or religious reasons. Maybe the church came in and said, hey, we want to control people, which is kind of like the history of religion in general, right? It doesn't have to be the church. And so these people had to look for other ways of going deeper and delving deeper, and they came up with breathwork. So that's where kind of the breathwork is tied in. And we can go down that whole breathwork thing, like, so as you get into like the 50s where there was a war on drugs, there were just before then they were using LSD and other entheogens or psychedelics for post-traumatic stress and depression, and now all of a sudden it's gone. So what do? So there was a guy named Stanislav Grof who developed something called holotropic breathwork. Holotropic means moving towards wholeness, and he would use this circular connective type of breathwork that we've talked about in the past, where you get into an altered state, and that whole idea of bypassing the default mode network, that part of your brain that's your ego, you kind of move past that, and then you can get into a whole bunch of like different healing states, and it's just quite a remarkable way of using like the breath instead of using an entheogen, if you will. Or I've started doing a little bit of experimenting with combining cannabis with breathwork as well. So canna-breathwork in a sense, and that can give you, some people describe it as an ayahuasca experience. Now I haven't experienced ayahuasca, but again, when you're using the breathwork, you bypass that default mode network, and you're creating different changes in your brain. You're getting anandamide, you're getting dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, and so on. So the combination of that with the breath and with cannabis is, it takes it to another level.
Interesting. I haven't heard of that combination of using cannabis. So is this CBD or THC?
It's going to be THC.
Yeah. And a lot of people talk about, well, is it, I don't even know the terms. What are the two different ways to characterize THC? Sativa and indica. Yeah.
So some people will like, and it's a very simplistic way of looking at it. Like sativa would be more like of a kind of an alerting or more of a brain or more in your mind, you're thinking. Some people can feel more anxious with a sativa, and then versus like an indica, which is more like a body or like a couch slouch, they call it.
Okay. And if you were to want to sort of get into this state, maybe one's not ready for psilocybin or doesn't have connections to psilocybin, but you can get, THC or cannabis anywhere. Would you want more of an indica then in that case, if you're pairing that with breathwork, or does it matter?
Yeah, I think, so there's a guy named Daniel McQueen, and he has a trip sitter school in Colorado. And he has a really interesting book. I highly recommend it, called Psychedelic Cannabis. And he describes using a combination. You could create your own combination. So you would get a sativa, an indica, and a blend or a hybrid. And you can mix them together and then create a blend that would give you that experience where you're not going too much in the mind, too much in the body. It's more kind of like a balanced thing. So you're getting the best of both worlds.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And then is that the cannabis ratio that you'd recommend for people in general? A lot of people use cannabis that listen to our podcast and stuff like that. Sure. Or is that more for just the breath work specifically?
No, I mean, it's all depending on what you want to do. Like if you're going to take like an indica blend, you're probably not going to want to go out for a hike. You're just going to be kind of like pinned to the couch. Okay, so more of that hybrid. That's a really good. I'll check out that book. I haven't heard of. Yeah, it's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, Colorado is like a hub for a lot of this stuff. I have some friends out there that do a lot of mushroom journeys and yeah, obviously the cannabis.
I mean, because it's decriminalized in there, and now they have, they're starting to use psilocybin in well, Oregon's been the first place, right? So they have like training now to become a facilitator.
Nice.
It's decriminalized in Seattle and in Colorado.
Yeah,
psilocybin.
That's amazing. And is LSD following suit, or that's a little bit behind?
Yeah, I don't know much about that. It's probably more behind.
Yeah.
I know MDMA is another one. So ecstasy is another one they're using. Yeah, I would say like things like ayahuasca probably not going to come into play, but for sure psilocybin.
Yeah. Interesting. Since we're on breathwork, maybe let's tackle that first and then circle back to psilocybin. Yeah. I think breathwork I've only done one. I mean, I've learned the insight meditation, which I believe it's the Vipassana style, more of a mindful based meditation. There's no mantra ascribed to that. I felt that was helpful, but then once I learned the circular breath work, that was like the next level. The sort of hyperventilation followed by retention. It seems that there's definitely a phase shift, and I wish, it's funny, like in medicine and also health, there's all these silos, right? The meditation people want you to just do meditation. They don't really talk much about the breath outside of the fact of not ascribing any meaning to the breath and just being present with it. But I think if you use your breath, you can get into that calm state. You can shift, alter your consciousness, like you mentioned. It's funny that that's not being talked about by the meditation community.
What I've done is I've taken heart math, I've taken Joe Dispenza, and I've kind of and the breathwork training that I've had, and created a routine that incorporates my music. So like my training was through the Soma breath, and they also combine some of those things, but their music is a little bit different. I'll use a lot of drumming type of music that's kind of a beat. And so depending on the count, so like you could go like in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4. And as you're doing this breathwork over time, you're blowing off a lot of carbon dioxide, and you're potentially changing the pH in your system. So you start to feel like some tingling, maybe some clawing, some tetany that's going on. And when you're blowing that off, it makes it easier to do the breath holds. And that's kind of where the magic comes in. So you do this repetitive circular, so it's continuous conscious breathing, no rest between the inhale and the exhale. So it'd be like, and it's so let's step back for a sec. So sure. Generally you want to breathe through your nose, right? Because your nose, you're increasing nitric oxide, you're preparing the breath for the lungs. It's a much healthier way of breathing. Yeah. For this type of breath work, I'm having people breathe through the mouth, and the reason is you get more of an emotional and sympathetic type of response. So it's a way of accessing stored emotions and trauma that are oftentimes stored in your hara, your gut. And so you do this continuous breath work, and after you've done the repetition for a little bit, that's when you do your breath holds. And people like Wim Hof, he does his breath holds primarily on expiration. So he'll have you breathe in and then breathe out and hold it for like 1 to 2 minutes. And then what we're doing, what I was taught through Soma, is that there's 2 types of breath holds, one on inspiration, one on expiration. So you start with the expiration first, blow out all the air, and that's where you start a lot of times feeling that tingling, and that's when your mind is going to start to wander, and you're kind of going to get past that default mode network, and then get a lot of those. That you're perturbing your system in a good way, creating a positive stressor. That's where you get like a short-term hypoxia, and that stimulates all those chemicals, those healthy chemicals like I was talking about, like anandamide and dopamine and so on, other neurotransmitters. And then on the inspiration hold, that's where I'm bringing some of the work with Dispenza and heart math, where you're imagining a ball of white healing light coming up your spine, up into your midbrain, to your third eye, and this kind of connecting to the collective unconscious, if you will. And then you're holding your breath and having that connection. And that also creates kind of a mystical or psychedelic experience as well.
I love that. This is super fascinating. And are you doing this with clients, patients as well, or mostly friends and family, the breathwork sessions?
Yeah. So I started off with friends and family in my living room.
Yeah.
And then so I started working with 2 yoga studios in downtown Kirkland.
Nice.
And I've done some one-on-one stuff with a few of my patients, and then with my wife started experimenting with cannabis.
Nice. And who is most likely to benefit from breath work and this particular style of breath work, not the Wim Hof stuff, although I think that has its benefits too.
Yeah.
But this type of, how could we characterize this? Is altered state consciousness breath work, circular breath work?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get into like a deeper, you can for sure get into an alpha state, and then depending on how much of the meditation you can bring in. So that's where the heart math comes in. So at the very beginning of a session, we'll start some breathing through the heart, right? So I'll have people set an intention, and the intention will be like, so what do you want to manifest in your life? We want better relationship, you want more money, whatever it is you might be. So they set that manifestation, okay? And then I have them raise their level of vibrational energy or love, right? And we'll do that by, think of someone or something, or it could be an animal, it could be a parent, it could be your spouse, whatever, that you have a lot of love for. And gratitude. So gratitude, love, compassion, these are all like really important emotions that can like raise that level of vibration. And then we go back to that thing that you want to bring into your life, and we bring in different senses. So like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? Where are you? Imagining that it's already occurred. So you're kind of like putting it into your nervous system again. And then again, feeling gratitude for that. And then we do the breath work, and that kind of seals it.
That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like, a lot of people are using these positive affirmations. They're sharing these little Instagram memes, but this is a more visceral way to sort of manifest or create the change that they want to see in their life. And then I think you're in a more suggestible state, even independent of psychedelics or even cannabis potentially, just that, higher alpha wave state and so forth. With the breath work, it's more suggestible, right? To sort of create these intentions and shift energy or traumas or mindset.
Yeah, I mean, you're not only are you in a higher suggestible state, but you're in a more connected state, with that collective unconsciousness, where like, you're in a more of that universal unconscious that we can tap into, and that's kind of where like healing really happens on a deeper level.
That's awesome. So many people have traumas from childhood, whether they were picked on at school with bullying, or in the home there was abuse issues. I mean, there's so much in that whole, I think the body keeps the score. I think I have a book somewhere around here. There's so much trauma going on. So people that have had trauma, are they the ones that are most likely to benefit from something like this?
I mean, first of all, I think anybody can benefit this. Yeah. We've all had some kind of trauma to some extent, but I think every class that I've done, like in the yoga studios that I've taught at, or even at home with friends and family, everybody's crying. Everybody's having an emotional release. They're feeling that release, and they feel much better afterwards. You get that catharsis that happens. It's not going to happen every time, but every time you're going to feel good afterwards. You're going to feel like you have all these feel-good chemicals going through your body. But there are going to be certain contraindications with this as well. Like if somebody has like a heart problem that's not controlled, or uncontrolled high blood pressure, or if they have like a tendency towards some kind of like schizophrenia or psychological type of issue, that that could be something where we want to be careful with. But other than that, like somebody who has depression, anxiety, PTSD, you also want to be in a scenario where you can help somebody to deal with this, right? Because these things are going to come up.
Yeah. It's amazing. I was not expecting, I've only done one sort of circular breathwork session like this, and I was intimidated by it going into it. It's like, it's 30 minutes of hyperventilation. And I only remember the first 2 minutes being sort of I had to work for it. And then your breath, like your autonomic nervous system just takes over, and you start breathing in that hyperventilation state, and you don't even think about it. It's like subconscious. And then it's like, it's totally shifts your consciousness. And it was like 90 minutes for me. And I thought, when I was done, Elle, my friend who guided me through that, I was like, that was amazing. And I was crying and thinking about all these things. And like you said, your hands get kind of tight like that. Yeah. But it was so releasing. It was just incredible. Yeah. I had no idea that you could shift your physiology and mind state with just your breath, like independent of drugs. It was pretty impressive.
It's incredible. And I would say, it's work. Like when people come to my class that haven't done this before, they said, this is not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And I tell them, like, it's kind of like you take a medication, and the medication takes a little bit of time to work, to kick in, and then you feel the results. So the way I've structured my class, like I say, you set the intention, we do a little meditation, we do a little prayer, and then we start the music. And the music, again, is like boom, boom, boom. But it's very emotional and evocative, and it keeps you kind of focused on what's going on. And then as you do like the breathing, the breath holds, after about 30 minutes, then we put on like more of a quiet meditation, soft music. And that's where you feel the result of the breath work, and you float. And then what we'll do during those times, I'll play like 4 or 5 songs. And for the first time, I'll say, okay, now focus on somebody that you have gratitude for, that you're grateful for. Focus on something that you want to bring into your life. Focus on the perfect day. What does that look like? That kind of thing. And then we create like kind of like these like intentional experiences where people have more of a connection and again can manifest.
I love that. That's amazing. So if someone, I want to get into psilocybin and cannabis,
Sure.
But if someone at home is like, okay, this sounds so fascinating, how would you find a breathwork facilitator? Like let's say your work and your family, you guys had to move to New York. What search terms would you use to like find someone that could guide you into learning how to do this type of breathwork?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of breathwork trainings out there, and every time I look online, I think, oh, there's another one. Or like on my Facebook, all of a sudden there's like 3 or 4 things come up because they look at they're spying on me, right?
Yeah.
And so if you just like would Google like breathwork class or facilitator, you probably get a whole bunch of things that would come up.
Right.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's different modalities, there's probably benefits of learning different ways of going about this,
Yeah.
I know like the Wim Hof and his teachers were doing a local thing, and that might be a place to start. And then you learn more about the circular technique down the road,
And I mean, they all have one thing in common. They're conscious, connected, circular, continuous breathing where there's no rest between the inhale and the exhale. And then where Wim Hof, he does his breath holds, Soma does breath holds. A lot of other ones that I'm not familiar with will probably incorporate some breath holds. I don't think Elle was incorporating breath holds with hers.
No, it was more, like you said, there's no rest in between. You're just hyperventilating.
Yeah, the breath holds are like really the magic, in my opinion. And then it gets back more to pranayama, like the kind of the yogi type of breathing where they incorporated the breath holds.
That's amazing. Because you and I are both interested in fitness, I'm curious, as you've expanded or probably more finely tuned your respiratory muscles and the muscles involved in breathing, what carryover has breath had in your physical fitness life?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's helped with my high intensity interval training. It's helped with repair. So like when we talked about a little bit about intermittent hypoxia. So intermittent hypoxia is a state where it's brief periods of getting into this hypoxic state. You don't want to be in a prolonged hypoxic state. That's not healthy. But it stimulates stem cells. So that's the cool thing about this technique is that when you have stem cells, what do? They heal, right? And if you have stem cells circulating throughout your system as a result of this breathing technique, and then you start visualizing, oh, I'm having knee pain, or I'm having elbow pain or neck pain, you visualize the progression or moving of these stem cells to those areas. It can be a phenomenally healing experience.
I love that.
But it has been shown to be helpful for increasing red blood cells, cardiovascular aerobic fitness, and again, repair, anti-inflammatory, anti-aging.
It's amazing. I mean, for some people, this might sound a little woo-woo, like, oh my gosh, you're visualizing stem cells go into a place of injury. But Herbert Benson has been writing about this, and I believe he was at Johns Hopkins or Boston College. Have you heard of this relaxation response? I mean, this is a very old paradigm, and he was studying people with stage 4 cancer and had them go into this relaxation state and compared, those sort of that cohort compared to classically medicated or chemotherapy, radiation, and the outcomes even back then, some 20 plus years ago, were completely different. Just having people be calm, being mindful, visualizing their immune system attacking the cancer. So while on the one hand, this might sound woo-woo, we have Western science to say that, hey, look, your mindset of visualization, these affirmations actually do, change your outcome in your physiology. So,
yeah, I mean, there's research coming out now on visualization. It's a very powerful tool.
Amazing. So breath has a lot of carryover. Psilocybin, let's go back to the entheogens. Entheogens, yeah. So psilocybin, mushrooms have been growing wild for a very long time. Paul Stamets has some theories as to why psychedelic mushrooms are here. Macro doses, if we talk about how it's affecting the brain, I think, and maybe we can start with a perception. So I shared my journey experience that you thankfully invited me to and nudged me along, because I was nervous, because I'm like, well, I've done the microdosing, but I feel like sometimes it can be a little anxiety producing as it's coming up, but then coming down, you feel great. And I was worried about, well, what is a 3-gram journey going to do? And I shared that with a few friends of mine who were in the health space. They're like, I could never do that. How do you know you're never going to come out of it? And I think a lot of people, we have this inclination to be in control at all times. And when you're on a macrodose of mushrooms, like, you have to just let the mushrooms do their thing. And that's part of like, the benefits come from that, probably just letting go.
Well, okay, so when I first did my first experience with it, I didn't know what to expect. And so we meet with this couple. One of them's a renal dialysis nurse, and I'm thinking, is she going to harvest my kidneys? And I'm there with my wife, and we're like in this small apartment. Are my kids going to be all right? Like, what if something happens to us? And we had gotten a referral to these people from a very close friend of mine. So like, I kind of like, okay, just relax. So so my wife and I go in there, and we're thinking, okay, we're going to negotiate the dose with them.
Go down.
Go down. Because we're not going to we'll just try 2 grams, right? And they go, nope. We're going to do 3.5 grams. It's a threshold dose, they called it, right? So they made us this tea, and they didn't tell. I had no idea of what to expect, right? So what happened is, like, we drank half the tea, and then we waited 20 minutes, and then we drank the other half. So we're in this small room. They're sitting on the couch, and then there's like 2 cots, and my wife and I are like foot to foot on these cots, and all of a sudden, I start getting these loud noises, and it's like shaking and turbulent. And I said, I'm not going to be able to do this for like 5 hours, right? So I start to like freak out a little bit. And so, the woman that was there, Pam, she came over, and she like kind of sat next to me, and they basically hold space for you, right? So like, because there's the idea that there's no bad trip, right? It's just like an experience, and if you're having a bad trip, then maybe there's something that's going on in your life that you're supposed to learn from it. So I lie down, and then all of a sudden I start to be on this Ferris wheel, and the Ferris wheel is like a little nausea, a little euphoria, and then like messages, and it kind of goes back and around. And first of all, like, they should have told me not to eat anything. So subsequently, I don't eat anything when I do this. But and all of a sudden, it was like euphoric bliss. And then my wife starts crying, and I think, are you okay? You doing okay? And then like she goes, I'm all right. Leave me alone. And then so they're doing like, they're shaking things, and they're drumming, and there's music in the background, and it was like a phenomenal experience. And then, but the takeoff was a little rough. And interestingly enough, after this experience, I think I might have shared this with you before, it didn't happen during the experience. And they say, like, a lot of times you can set an intention, and every time I go into this, I set a bunch of intentions, and almost always these things come through. But this one, I didn't set any intentions, and at the end, I felt like this release of animosity that I had towards my ex-wife. And I ended up emailing her and just apologizing for my role in our divorce. And we went back and forth again. It kind of makes me teary. And it shifted things for us. And then she came to visit us. She came to visit our son, and who had been traumatized by our divorce. And she came for dinner. We invited her for dinner. My family was there, and my son was there. And afterwards, we went to the back of, on my patio, and I sat there with her and my son as he sobbed. We were like connecting. It was like, you can't have that kind of healing,
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so you probably wouldn't have had that conversation had you not done the mushrooms.
I mean, I was like angry with her.
Yeah.
And so, but it was like, and so we like, it, is such an amazing, like you can't get that from counseling.
Right. Talk therapy or these things.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
And so, so like energetically it's affected him. It's affected our relationships. It's affected my wife, like my wife and I, like we have a closer relationship.
Yeah.
But like we're even closer.
That's awesome, Geoff. That is so cool.
But so getting back to like dose. So like now, like, every time that I start taking the dose, I describe to people, it's like getting on an airplane and like you're taking off and it becomes turbulent.
Yeah.
And it can be anxiety. It can cause some anxiety, but I've learned to sit with it and breathe with it. And then like the breathing helps me get through it. And then you kind of get up to that cruising altitude. And I hear this, welcome back.
Yeah. Flight attendants, you can now serve the soda pop and cookies.
like it's like, again, you get to the space where I can start asking them questions, and not once have I ever felt like out of control. I've never felt like they're in control or like I'm gonna go to a bad place. It's a little shaky going up to the bathroom because like she's got an outhouse, as like in her backyard. You go there, but it's just like it's just been like a euphoric experience that like is very healing. And every time, and the healing, it's not like you can do this experience and that's it. You have to integrate the experience. That's like essential, right? Because if you do this and you don't integrate it, then it's like,
what's the point?
You're just going on a trip.
It's like,
and I've gone to the point where like I won't do, like I'll do a micro dose, but I won't do like a museum dose, or I won't do like a party dose, because I feel it's almost disrespectful to the plant. I'm kind of like, I'll do a dose where I'm going to have an experience and I want to get something out of it. And for me, it's been like this thing where I feel like I get messages. Like, I'll give you another example. So I have a really close friend who lost her child and stillborn. And this happened like probably like at this point about 18 years ago. I hadn't talked about this kid forever. Like I haven't even thought about this kid. And on one of my journeys with Randy, all of a sudden this little soul comes to me, and the name of the child was Tall, and starts like, I'm like dancing with this spirit, this soul. And he says, tell my mom, tell her thank you. She was my earth mom. So I called up my friend and I told her that, and she was like, she cried, she was grateful, but it was like, I was getting this message to give to somebody else. And then subsequently I get these, like, whenever I do it, I feel like I get these messages. And I almost feel like for me, I've been called to do this work with these mushrooms. And at some point, I think my wife and I are going to transition my practice that I have now to using entheogens, like primarily psilocybin and maybe cannabis, to help people to journey. And not so much from a clinical perspective, but more from, it's like, it's the mystical experience that people leave with that helps with the healing. And the clinical experience when they do this research with Johns Hopkins, or where they have you lie in a cot and you have and it's very sterile. It's not, to me, the kind of experience that I want to show other people. The experience that I've had has been, you get the music on, you have candles, you're in like a very kind of not native, but an experience that's more indigenous, and it's really kind of like a mystical thing. You use some drumming, and it really like creates an environment that's spiritual and healing.
I love that. Some of the pictures that I've seen in the articles that have been published on MDMA or psilocybin or LSD, and they do show the clinical setting, it looks, like you said, very sterile and drab, and you're like, I wouldn't feel comfortable even going in that scenario. Like being connected with nature, I think, or some sort of more natural leaning sort of environment.
And the music, again, is really important, and it's like, I know, and like people might sound like, like you're just hallucinating, right? Because you are you're getting like a huge rush of serotonin, right? But how much of our brain do we use generally? Not like, you don't use the whole thing. And so, I mean, the way I see it is that you're kind of opening up more of your brain and using more of it to have these mystical experiences. And like, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm not afraid of death. I feel like totally connected to people in a different way. And you know, it wears off a little bit. Like what happens is you get this wonderful experience, and it's like a comet. Then like over the next couple of weeks, you got this tail that kind of like slowly fizzles out. But I always write things down, and I try and integrate, what did I learn from this journey? You know, what do I need to do now? And it's really interesting, like things will come up, and I'll like, you know, it's almost like when I ask, like, for example, like, what can I do to be a better healer with my patients? And all of a sudden I'll get like, these books will start coming up, or these podcasts will start coming up, and I'll start like, that's how I got into heart math, which I know you've talked about a lot, or more into Joe Dispenza's work. So I'll start reading these things, or more like psychic things will come up. Like people will like, that I haven't, like I'll be thinking of a patient, and all of a sudden I'll make an appointment. Like on one of my journeys, it was like, I hadn't seen this patient probably in a couple of months. And after the journey, I look at my phone, you know, it's like we're checking out and stuff. And like, there's an email from her.
Wow.
I wanted to make an appointment with you. It was her email. It's like, what the hell? Like, this is like, I hadn't thought of this patient for like a few months, and all of a sudden she's emailing me after I thought about her. And then with this patient, the way I thought about her during this journey is this patient's a vet, and she, for her practice, is she's an end-of-life vet. So she helps animals, you know, she puts them to sleep and helps families to cope. The message I get for her, all of a sudden out of the blue, is tell her we're thankful for the work she's doing. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah, that's super powerful. And I think there are no coincidences in life. You know, these things happen for a reason. And this has all happened to us. I mean, whether or not someone's done psilocybin or not, if you're thinking about a friend, or sometimes I'll be thinking about someone I need to call, or like, oh, I should reach out to that person. And literally they text or they call. And that, I think, happens more so when you're in alignment, you know, when you're having good energy states and putting out whatever word you want to ascribe this, good mojo, good energy, good chi. And I think probably these plant medicines help facilitate that, which is just so
it opens
powerful.
It up. That and the breath work, you know, and just meditating for sure, I think is important. It opens it up.
So fascinating. Well, going back to the brain, I think it is quite interesting how Western science is trying to look through fMRI studies, imaging studies with people on psilocybin or LSD or MDMA, whatever, trying to characterize, well, hey, mechanistically, like we like to unwind, you know, how things happen. I don't think it's fully elucidated, right? We talked about the brain waves and then the default mode network. What other from you know, your experience and clinical research and training in this area, what do you think is going on in the brain that is noteworthy and may lend someone to maybe consider, you know, psychedelics potentially?
I mean, I think the biggest one is that the default mode network. So like we have our ego, right? And that kind of like how we run things, like their day-to-day processes and our story, right? And I think the big thing is like when you bypass that or shake that up a little bit, you know, that's where you can get into like you know, these deeper connections and healing of different traumas and it's so like I read another paper, and I can't remember who the authors were, but that the default mode network is only part of it. There's other things that are happening in the brain. It's you know, we try to be so mechanistic and so black and white, and you really can't be with this because you can't describe this in a black and white way. Like I said, it's ineffable. It's like beyond words to describe. But I mean, I think the one thing is like it's not stimulating the reward centers in your brain. So these aren't addictive substances. It's not like you're going to do a mushroom trip and say, oh, I got to do this again.
Got to vape mushrooms, man.
Yeah. I mean, there's like, I mean, it's an experience that it can bring up things that are difficult to deal with, or at the same time, it can create that connection or a combination of those things. And the way we use it isn't the way, like, for example, some of the Mazatec Indians will use it. Like, so getting back to psilocybin, so how did that become popular? So there was a curandera named Maria Sabina, and she is in the Oaxaca state in Mexico, or was. She passed away. And there was, I can't remember what he did, whether he was a banker or something, but somehow this guy went to Mexico and convinced Maria Sabina to have him journey with her. Now, in general, these curanderos, what they would do is they would on certain times of year when the mushrooms were like more in season, they would go on like a journey. They would take like high doses in the dark with candles, saying prayers, and they would get messages for healing for people who would have a problem. And it could be like a physical problem, a mental problem, like a psychological, or some kind of problem. And they would take the mushrooms and they would use that to help them to heal the person. And then, so this guy, and for the life of me, I can't remember his name, but he was so famous that there was an article in Time magazine that was written, and then all of a sudden, like the Beatles and all these other hippies would, go to like inundate this poor woman who at some point was ostracized by her community and died, without any money, and like, it was a bad situation. But that's kind of how like the mushrooms kind of came into play in Western culture, like all these people going over there and kind of bringing it back here. And of course, then there was like guys like Terence McKenna and his brother Dennis McKenna, who went and also like explored mushrooms in the Amazon and in Mexico and so on, and kind of made it popular. I know I'm digressing again. So like,
no, it's interesting.
So also Ram Dass, and that's not his real name, but that was his name once after he went and kind of he was like either a psychologist or researcher at Harvard, and him and Timothy Leary, they were also during that time when there was like the beginning of the war on drugs, they went and had these like psychedelics experiences and came back and then were ostracized by Harvard and lost their jobs. But Timothy Leary went on to become one of these gurus, I think it was a turn on, turn off, tune out, or something like that. He was trying to like get this whole culture. He became known during that era as the most dangerous man alive, because he was encouraging people to like use these entheogens to like open up their minds. And so that's when like the government said, well, we don't want people to think for themselves, right? And that's when they became Schedule I medication or drugs.
Yeah, and growing up, and I think there is that perception, even with cannabis or LSD, psilocybin, that these things are, they rot your brain. I mean, what is the propaganda that you heard? I mean, I remember the DARE, don't do drugs thing in the 90s and the 80s, like, these things were so bad for you and all this. And now, we have icons in our culture like Steve Jobs, who was not quiet or shy about his psychedelic drug use and so forth. And we know, I mean, everyone has an iPhone or uses the App Store or iTunes. I mean, it's just quite incredible, the way that it causes people to think differently. Yeah. And I think in particular, the benefits, a lot of people self-medicate with alcohol, self-medicate with porn, with fast food. I mean, this seems like a much more sustainable way to get at that trauma, whether it's unresolved relationship issues like you were talking about with your ex-wife, or it could be with parents, or it could be with siblings, whatever. I mean, it seems like a much more better way to have that forgiveness, because holding on to that anger is not serving anyone.
No, I mean, it's deep counseling.
Yeah.
And some people aren't ready for it. And like some people are scared of they're scared of what might come up. I was supposed to do a journey with my middle brother, and who's had some health challenges, and he the night before wasn't sleeping well, so he decided that he wasn't going to do it that morning. So I said, fuck it, I'm going. And so I ended up going with his wife, my sister-in-law, and she had the most amazing experience. Like, where she had no expectations, and she didn't know what to expect, but like, good for her for coming to the table, right? So like, we went together, and she like said part of it, she relived every momentous, significant moment in her life. Like, she was like going there, and afterwards she goes, I want to go back.
Wow, that's
and
impressive.
She goes to my brother, you got to go back. So they're going to go back and to see Randy and have this experience again. But I was supposed to go with my son, and at the last minute he didn't feel comfortable doing it. So I said, fuck it, I'm going. And so, like, things are meant to happen for a reason. And I think partly with my brother, like, he was probably nervous about going, and rightfully so. Like, people think, am I going to lose, I'm going to lose control. You don't lose control. I can tell you, like, I've never lost control. And that's the biggest argument we get from all our friends who are trying to convince to do this, that I'm going to lose control. No, it might mirror some anxiety or some issues that are going on in your life, but it's not like you're going to go out and run out in the street naked or do something like, or, not come back.
Right.
I've never had that issue, that feeling. It's always been the same thing, euphoric bliss. And so that one time when I was supposed to go with my son, he said, no, I don't feel comfortable going. So I go there, and Randy and I basically are listening to like Led Zeppelin, The Doors and stuff, like for like 5 hours, and we were connecting. It was like, I felt like we were like connecting together on another level, and we would like sit outside, we would go back in, I would cry, I would laugh, she would do some body work on me, and it's phenomenal. It was
That's
like,
great.
And then like every experience has been like phenomenal. Sometimes afterwards I'll get a headache, and I think that's partly from like you're getting a big flush of serotonin. So we're experimenting with like caffeine, or maybe using a little cannabis afterwards, just to kind of help like with some of the changes that might be happening in your brain that are causing that headache.
I think it's fascinating. Now, the people who maybe should be more cautious. I know with LSD, there's a risk for people that have like bipolar or schizophrenia in the family or first degree relative or personal history. Is that a concern, do you think, or doing lower dosages or something?
No, I mean, I think definitely somebody who has like a propensity towards schizophrenia or some kind of psychotic type of reaction, I would definitely probably steer them away. People who are on SSRIs, like I know that that they are taking psilocybin journeys. I mean, people who are clinically depressed are using they're using this for to help them with that, and it's like, the way that I've heard it described is like it's the ineffable part of this mystical experience that helps. Like, for example, I heard a story where somebody was, a smoker, so like addictions, right? And afterwards she's saying like, why would I want to do this to my body after like I've seen how beautiful the world is? Like it's like that kind of healing, right? It's not like you don't talk through like the addiction and this is bad for your body. You're getting a mystical experience, and that it's through that mystical experience that's like it creates a Control-Alt-Delete on your system, I think.
Right, because we've seen the pictures. Like, if you buy cigarettes in Canada, there's pictures of like necrotic lungs, right? And I think that's powerful, but that's still a logical argument. I mean, you appeal to emotion a little bit, but when you have this emotional shift, like you're talking about, or a metaphysical, spiritual shift here, it causes people to really change their behavior, which I think is quite powerful. But going back to depression and anxiety, there was an observational study that recently came out, I think in January, December, finding that people who recreationally use mushrooms compared to the average population have significantly lower rates or feelings of anxiety, depression, and self-reported like self-harm and suicidal ideation. So there's just there's this observable observation, like you said, there's general feeling of better well-being. And I think it's hard to argue with that, especially considering the fact that, if you look at the data on serotonin and some of these things, like, some of this could be placebo or off-target effects. This whole serotonin-mediated hypothesis linked with depression is really in question. There was a September paper, talking about that. So looking at other ways, especially now, with the loneliness created from the pandemic and lockdowns and all that, I think this is a good time for people to consider something along these lines. Now, it seems like the downside here is it seems like you have to know someone, right? Maybe there's a medical setting, or like you said, in Oregon, there might be more facilitators, but it seems like you kind of have to know someone who knows someone to get access to mushrooms.
It is like an underground thing. And like I said, I believe it's decriminalized. Like, unless somebody, unless you have like a big, huge bag of mushrooms and it looks like you're going to sell them, I think that for the most part, leave you alone. But yeah, I mean, it's underground. You have to find somebody that like that's doing it that you trust, and there's got to be a certain amount of trust. And like, interestingly enough, the way I found Randy is I was at a party, and there was another naturopathic physician there, and we started talking, and we connected, and she goes, yeah, I know somebody who does these psilocybin journeys, and she does them with body work. I thought, well, sign me up. So I contacted her, and we connected back and forth, and so I made an appointment, and then my wife made an appointment, and then we made an appointment together. So like we've gone back and forth, but it was that connection through another person where, you know, who I trusted. And then, and interestingly enough, I mean, this will blow you away. So like, I have a patient, and I'm talking, and I'm mentioning to him, and he goes, Randy? I go, are you kidding me?
Wow.
He's seen her too, him and his wife. So like, you know, the universe is really kind of like, I mean, it's going to connect you for these things. And you know, it's connected me. I mean, I wasn't ready. I wouldn't have been ready for this 2 years ago. And it, like, I think when you're ready, it comes. And then, you know, I've probably turned, you know, a number of people onto Randy, and I don't know if she wants us to mention her name, or to like at this
first
point,
name,
like, I mean, maybe at some point, you could do a podcast with her. She's interested in doing that, but I know she's very busy at this point with like, I think I built her practice.
That's awesome
at this point, but and you know, I feel good about it because I think it's helped
a lot of people.
Yeah.
No, it's impressive. I mean, you can grow these things. I mean, I've done some reviews there. There's midwestgrowkits.com. I think it's called purespores.com or purespores.net.
You get separate things. You can get the spores, and you can get other parts of it, and then you put it together.
Correct.
Yeah. And then one thing I forgot to mention, so when you talk about mechanisms, so like there's this idea of neuroplasticity, right? Creating neural pathways in your brain. And that's really another big way that this is happening. You're creating, you know, different pathways in the brain. So like a new like circuits for healing.
Yeah.
And so, and that's exciting. So like people, like you would say, you know, like, with the war on drugs, oh, you're frying your brain. Bullshit, you're not frying your brain. You're creating new circuits.
Right.
Like you're helping your brain.
Yeah.
Now, would you want like a teenager to be doing this? You know, probably not at this state of their development. You know, like when they're developing a developing brain, you know, you don't want them to be taking a lot of mushrooms or like cannabis or alcohol or things like that. But when you look at some of the books that I've read, and like, you know, once I got into this, I've probably read all the mushroom books that are out there. That some of these indigenous cultures would use smaller doses with kids, you know, to have them part of the ceremony. And so
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. At what point will you get your kids a microdose? Or
you know, I would consider at this point using a microdose, you know, if my kids were having like, you know,
some
ADD issues, or, you know, if I felt like they were depressed, or like, I mean, I wouldn't want my kid to go on an antidepressant. Right. I wouldn't want my kid to go on an ADD medication. And certainly, like, I'm not anti-medication. I recognize that there's a place for these things, but like, why not use like a plant medicine if it's not going to be harmful and not going to have the harmful side effects?
I love that. Yeah. Well, a lot of parents wouldn't bat an eye about putting their kid on an SSRI or anything. Yeah. But then if you think about, well, what is that really doing to the developing brain? I mean, forget, you know, we talk about, well, THC or cannabis or mushrooms or LSD in the developing brain. But when you block a receptor or upregulate a receptor pharmacologically, I mean, I think that has the potential to have a lot of downside synaptic plasticity changes, and there's a lot of issues there. So yeah, I think this would be more a friendlier way to consider, if there was a mental health issue.
Yeah, certainly microdosing, I don't think you can have any issues with harmful side effects. And like with I have a 26-year-old, so like my wife and him and I are going to go on a journey with Randy. I mean, at this point, he's open to it again. Like if he doesn't go, Stephanie and I are going.
Right.
I would say I would love my entire family to go. Mm-hmm. On the last journey that we were at, I had my youngest brother. He came and joined, and he had a mixed experience, only because one, he was watching that television show about
The End of Us,
mushrooms taking over the world, and that's probably not a good thing. And then but I think for family therapy, for couples therapy, you can do all the talk therapy you want, but if you really want to get to the healing and the root cause, or the connection, go on a mushroom trip,
Yeah.
under a guided trip.
Right.
And like with the breath work, I really want to start working with couples as well, because that's another way to like connect and do it through like these feel good chemicals and like visual imagery and connecting in a way that's not like, go for like typical marital counseling. Oh, I hear what you're saying, or you learn all these like different words to say and like back and forth. And it's all about like, a lot of times like I'm right, you're wrong and stuff. Like, fuck it, you're both right, you're both wrong. How are you going to heal? Do you want to heal? You got to get the ego out of it, right? Once you get the ego out of it, that's when the healing starts. And that's where these breath work and entheogens can help you, heal.
I love it. This is fascinating. Okay, so Geoff, if local patients want to connect with you, what's the best online resource to do that?
Yeah, probably my website. It's www.drgeofflecovin.com. That's my website. I'm in downtown Kirkland.
Nice.
Feel free to reach out to me. If you're going to reach out to me and email me asking me for Randy's contact information, I don't know at this point. Like, I mean, I can talk to her, but like she's so busy, and then I want to get back in. So, but like I felt like I've really felt like I was nervous again, and I've kind of felt like it's been like a learning experience, right? So the first experience, you're in it's a high school experience, and what I mean by that is like the dosage is like a high school dose. Like, what am I going to learn in high school with this dose, right? And now, like, I've done that dose. So I feel like I've got the message from that dose. And so the next time I'm going to progressively push the dose up a little bit to see what other messages are there. Because like, it's like, I've heard the analogy, you spray some Windex on the windows, and more Windex you spray, the clearer the glass, right? So like, I feel like I need to go to that next dose to get like what other messages I can get through the medicine. And it's been a comfortable stepping up stone for it. So like, I mean, I'm happy to help people, guide people, give them information, have them come to my breathwork class. I have a couple going on, one in April, one in May.
Nice.
If you come to my class, maybe I'll connect you with Randy.
Yeah. Better in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, for me, just finishing off on the dose, we had 2 cups of tea, or we were offered 2 cups of tea. I was the only one that didn't drink the second cup of tea, just because I was a little bit nervous, because I had a bad ayahuasca experience, and that was sort of like on my consciousness. But in hindsight, it probably would have been better for me to have that second cup. But either way, I still had a great experience, learned a lot, have created great connections as a result of it. My intentions going into it have become true. And so, yeah. But I definitely will say, having done microdosing off and on for like 6 years now, I will say that macrodosing is definitely kind of the way to go,
I think so, yeah.
So
I mean, I do, like I said, I do this stack where I'll do like some CBD. I do 50 milligrams of CBD, 250 milligrams of a capsule of psilocybin, and a little bit of caffeine. And I'm having a great day.
Yeah.
And I'm not like, I can drive, I can hang out. I just feel like I'm just like, and I'm not a depressed or unhappy person, but I just feel like I'm glowing a little bit more. And I wouldn't do it every day,
right.
But I would say like it's kind of like a cool, Saturday,
feel good,
go to my kid's baseball game.
Totally. Yeah. And then I found the next day too, you're definitely more connected as well. Like, it's not, that's what's unique about it. If you experiment with, say, if you were to binge drink on Saturday, you feel like crap on Sunday.
Yeah.
The inverse is true, with psilocybin, like you feel even better the next day.
Yeah. And that's with the dosing for microdosing, like there's different protocols. There's the Stamets protocol and the Fadiman protocol. So like, usually like you do the microdose, and then, you're still feeling something maybe the second day, and then the third day it's out of your system, and then you do it again on the fourth. You do it on the fourth day.
Yeah. Incredible. So much here. So Geoff with the G, drgeofflecovin.com. Appreciate you coming on. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, and thanks for being vulnerable and talking about that. That's powerful.
That's great.